No, because I'm not in the House of Commons, and it's not for me to shout it.
But you have a view about
having
it.
listened to George, I have to say that as to whether or not someone makes a good or a bad speaker because of background or origin or religion, that has nothing to do with it in my book. I mean, whether or not a speaker is good is for the MPs of the House of Commons to judge. They can decide what virtues or qualities they need, and that's their judgment. And I have to say, George, I mean, I don't think to me that should be a party political matter. Surely to goodness, that's a matter for all MPs in the House of Commons to come to their own
It did take 350 years to get a Catholic speaker. Was that just a coincidence?
There is a Catholic speaker. I mean, and to me, as I say, background and religion are no barrier. What matters, I presume, is whether the man is...
otherwise.
Well, what matters, I would have thought, was whether the speaker was a capable administrator of the affairs of the chamber of the House of Commons and a capable organiser of the business of the House.
And are the Tories, your fellow Tories in the House of Commons, all braying toffs and hooray Henrys, like Mr Galloway says, who just sort of want to get him out on snobbish grounds?
Absolutely not. I mean,
so he's wrong on that point.
My understanding is that some of the adverse, I think, frankly, very unsavoury comment has come actually from media commentators. Now, if these comments, George, have been by way of being, sneering, snide observations, I deplore that as much as anyone else. I think that's absolutely disgraceful. Doesn't help the discussion, and that's not at the heart of the issue.
David, he hasn't broken a single rule. He hasn't broken a single law. Why is he being hung out to dry?
Nicola Sturgeon, why do you think?
Well, I should say, just following on from George's comment about him being the first Catholic speaker, which I think is good too, he's also just employed the first female Sergeant-at-Arms in the House of Commons, so perhaps he's more progressive than many of the people who are trying to denigrate him. Frankly, I've no idea whether Michael Martin is a good Speaker of the House of Commons or not. I'm not and never have been a member of the House of Commons. My SNP colleagues speak quite highly of him as the Speaker of the House of Commons. I tell you this, back in 2003, it was Michael Martin who gave those in the House of Commons who opposed the war in Iraq the chance to vote against the war in Iraq because he selected the anti-war amendment, which under the rules, as I understand it, he wasn't obliged to do. So perhaps he's not as bad as some would make out. I do tend to agree that there's a lot of public school snobbishness here. Gorbals Mick, Michael Martin doesn't even come from the Gorbals. There's a lot of ignorance there as well. And Quintin Letts, the Daily Mail columnist, is not content with calling the Speaker Gorbals Mick. I read a column from him earlier this week where he referred to the Speaker's wife as Mrs Mick. I mean, that's frankly not acceptable, and I think brings the reputation of columnists and commentators down. I don't know if he's a good speaker. I don't know if some of the accusations being levelled against him just now are justified or not, but let's raise the debate a bit. And I think if the House of Commons needs to get its house in order, then there are other places it should be starting about being more upfront about its expenses, for example.
Okay. Nicola, Stephen, the Liberal Democrats did take exception to the Speaker, and one of them was kicked out of the House of Commons last week, and the rest marched out with him in a display of protest against the Speaker's ruling. Do you think he's fit to remain Speaker? Or should the government, well, I don't know if the government can get rid of him, should the House of Commons get rid of him?
I think there are separate issues here, and there are some very important issues. For example, the dispute that the Liberal Democrats had with the Speaker earlier this week. I wouldn't personalise and I wouldn't suggest that it means he can no longer be the Speaker or he's no longer fit to be the Speaker. That would be ridiculous. But there was a serious issue there on being allowed, one of the major parties in this country being allowed to put forward on the floor of the House its view and have a vote on its view on the issue of Europe and the referendum that we propose for Europe. Now, there's a separate point, and it's not either to do with what George Galloway was talking about here. It's got to do with the House of Commons and the culture in the House of Commons. I was a member of the House of Commons back in the early 1990s, and I saw it then. And by the way, Michael Martin at that time was a deputy speaker and very helpful to me in explaining some of the arcane and ridiculous rules of procedure in the House of Commons. So there is a culture that is still very much one of the gentleman's club, the 19th century gentleman's club, as George well knows. And it affects the attitude to openness and transparency. It affects the attitude to expenses. And this is an issue, I think, of importance. Nobody is saying that Michael Martin has done anything wrong, but when members of the public hear that somebody has claimed £25,000 for a house in Scotland that he no longer has a mortgage on, when they hear that his wife has reclaimed taxi expenses of £4,000 for going places with the Speaker's housemaid, when they hear that air miles have been used to allow members of the family to travel business class. There are real and important issues here, and the House of Commons has got to change. It's got to get its act in order. It is not acceptable at the start of the 21st century that our members of Parliament behave in this way. And for all these reasons, I think there needs to be a review. In Scotland, we've done it very differently from the House of Commons. It's been an independent review chaired by the principal of one of our universities. In the House of Commons, I now believe that Michael Martin, the Speaker, is the wrong person to conduct that review, and there needs to be a fresh, open and independent approach, and the system has got to change.
Just to clarify the point, you use the accusations that are made against him about his expenses to say, firstly, that he shouldn't be conducting the review of expenses and behaviour. Do you add to that that he should stand down as Speaker, or do you think it's fine for him to remain as Speaker?
I think the important point is the independent review, and I think he should remain as Speaker. If he hasn't broken any expenses rules, I can't see a case for him standing down as Speaker, but I can see a case for him standing down as the person in charge of the new approach to expenses. That would, in my view, be quite the wrong thing to happen.
The woman at the back there.
I'm very glad, Nicola, that you raised the question of expenses. On my part, I couldn't care less where Michael Martin came from, what sex he is, what colour he is, or where he chooses to pray or not. The fact that he is claiming, and all MPs are allowed to claim the amounts of money that we've heard about when so many people in this country live in abject poverty, is obscene.
Just to back up that point and Nicole's point, in the private sector, the tax-paying private sector, we have to account for every single expense that we claim back. So the way we'll get the money out of our companies. You look at the public sector and they have a different way of handling expenses, and they don't really look like expenses to me.
Okay, and you, sir. Yellow.
Can either the Speaker or the House of Commons learn from the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament in terms of conducting debates? We have no Yaboo politics up here.
Is that so?
Are you being serious?
Cathy Jamieson.
Well, I didn't expect to agree with much that George Galloway has said tonight.
And yet you used to agree with everything.
But we used to appear in platforms regularly, he's going to remind us. But no, seriously, I do agree with the point that George made, that this should not be personalised around Michael Martin. Michael Martin has not, to my knowledge, broken any of the rules that are there in the House of Commons. I think we should celebrate the fact that someone who has come from the type of background that he has come from has been able to get into Parliament, to represent his constituents and to do a good job in the Parliament. And, you know, people do question, and I understand why people, like the gentleman there, would question the issue of expenses. Yes, it's right and proper that people have to account for what is public money at the end of the day, but I do think that we need an expenses system that ensures it's not only those who have private funds themselves that would be able to stand for political office, and therefore people need the resources to run their offices and to be able to do their job.
I'll take a couple more points, then we'll move on. From the woman in the very front row here, and then you, sir. Yes.
As we've said, obviously it's not about the man himself, it's about the expenses review, and I agree with Nico. I don't think it should be done by a Speaker himself. I think it should be done by an independent body or even a separate elected body. I don't know what the panel think about that.
Okay, and you at the back. Yes.
Doesn't Cathy Jamieson think it's important to stick to the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law? And if the Speaker of the House of Parliament doesn't set that example, who should set it?
The spirit of the regulation of MPs' expenses.
Regulations. You shouldn't have to.
Who discovers what the spirit of it is?
The spirit and the letter of the House of Commons law is wrong. It is absolutely outrageous and indefensible that you can claim up to, I think it's 250 quid without showing any receipts. You can't do that in the Scottish Parliament. You shouldn't be able to do it in the House of Commons either.
We'll move on. We've got a question from Stephen Sweeney, please. Stephen Sweeney.